1 second. It's not coming full screen. Okay, maybe I'll need some help on this side.
Ma'am, it's not coming full screen.
Now?
No.
Okay. So I will stop sharing and try it again. Okay. Share the entire screen. Okay. Right. No, I'm not getting it. Prachi, can you just have a look here? Now?
Not full screen has not come.
Yes. Now it's come.
Now it's visible.
Okay, great.
Now it's come, ma'am. Now it's come.
Okay, thank you. Now I can't see any of you, so I will just speak, and if you have any problems, just stop and tell me. Let's keep it informal. So today I'm going to talk about learning and the ways in which we seek to do our own research and to communicate that research to various other members of the academic community and to the general public. So the talk is on several dimensions, and many of you have seen this little video, which I will just try to run through fast. And it just exemplifies or it sort of encompasses what we are trying to do in our institute. That is to do as good research as is possible with many colleagues from different disciplines using different methods and different innovative approaches. But at the same time, to move beyond research and to move beyond publications to communicate this to as wide a community as possible, but in as much detail and intensity and depth as we can. So not just a casual method of communication, but to do something which has some long lasting meaning. So this is what the talk is going to be about. And so I have called it, and Akhilesh has called it pedagogy in prehistory. So it's not just the research part. Obviously, first I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues here in the office, Dr. Prachi, Dr. Shutonupam, and many other of our collaborators from all over the world. And I think you know many of them, and interns and volunteers and the villagers, the townspeople from where we are actually working, and of course our families. Now, in this talk, we all acknowledge that our past is layered, and there are many dimensions in examining any topic in archaeology, and in this case, prehistory, whether it is looking at cultures or lithics or hominins or behavior, migration, environment, but these are intrinsically interrelated with aspects of conservation, awareness, sustainability. And this is really important as many of our sites, as you all know, are rapidly vanishing. Outreach and science communication, and of course, the entire world of legislations within which we have to structure all our work. So, this leads to pedagogy. So, in our view, the pedagogical approaches which we need to look at should be immersive, inspirational, and innovative. So, just learning facts and figures is fine, but that's not enough. And we have to move beyond that to inspire people and to generate some sort of innovative learning approaches. Obviously, they should be relevant because very often prehistory is considered to be completely irrelevant and lacking any connection with the modern world. And this is what we seek to dispel, to stimulate curiosity, whether it is in a PhD student or an MA student or undergraduate or a government official administering archaeology departments. It should stimulate curiosity, obviously be multidisciplinary, updated, introduce alternate perspectives for thinking, and be inclusive. So this is what we feel is very necessary when we are teaching prehistory in the Indian context. And obviously it has to be linked with the organization or the department or the institute's research background and research component, and it should be bound together in something that can fulfill at least some of these many very ambitious goals. So in the first part, in the second part, we'll be looking at this public outreach and pedagogy with multiple different stakeholders, whether it is children, which we have been doing since 99 onwards, university faculty, local stakeholders in the villages where you work, or the general interested community. So these are what we are going to discuss. Now, we have about 40 minutes, and within that, the first part, obviously, I'd like to talk a little bit about our research, because this research is the foundation for which, based on which we are going to, and we have been developing all these science communication and pedagogical approaches. And as the research goes on expanding in new directions, obviously, what we are teaching, the ways we are teaching, the methods of involving local stakeholders, or the methods by which we are trying to communicate our work has to change. So every year you will see, at least in our institute, that we have to show some innovation, some of these main points which I was talking about, some of these points which has to be constantly thought about, constantly reframed, abandoned, discarded if it's not working, and updated as we move ahead. In our own research projects, and primarily, although we are working in parts of South India and Tamil Nadu, we have done work elsewhere. Whatever it is, we are looking at landscapes, sites, lithics, building up very solid chronologies, and examining paleo environment. So these are our key areas of interest, and obviously each area of interest will spin off into a number of smaller sub pocket groups of other deeper research groups, which can take it forward in many directions as we wish to do so. And as you all know, and I won't go into it in detail, but you all know this, that there are multiple questions, especially in the deep past, related to which species was there in India, when did they come, how did they come, and this complex question of timing, and the complex question of interaction between different species, and the even more difficult question of correlating species with the lithic assemblages. So within this context, we seek to situate our research and raise some important questions. And obviously, the basic aim which everybody wants to know is about behavior, about cognition, about cultural evolution, beginnings, endings, technology, and the root is obviously lying at looking at past behavior. In India, as far as deep time is concerned, this is all we have, the stone tools. We have fossils, we have other antiquities, but the primary data is in the survival of these lithics, and therefore this forms the basic constituent, the main component of any research strategy, looking at these and situating them in their appropriate context and decoding them in various ways to be able to address our research queries. So as far as our project is concerned, we are dealing in this, we are dealing in this part of Southeast India, as you see near Chennai. And all these little red dots are prehistoric sites, primary Paleolithic, lower to late, that we have been documenting over the years and building up a massive database for. So in this overall examination of this very large region, I think more than 8,000 square kilometers, we have documented for each site not only the local stratigraphy and the context of the lithics, but also situating it in terms of various other geomorphological, geological, elevation, and other features by which we can be able to look at some broad patterns at a certain resolution or scale of resolution, which is applicable for looking at things on a very broad perspective. So this has yielded some excellent data. to sites, various different types of sampling strategies, and you can see here different methods being adopted to obtain a representative sample, whether it is use of satellite remote sensing at various resolutions, whether it is these long transect surveys. You can see here students who came to work with us documenting sites over vast regions and being able to control the sample size by which we can come out with meaningful inferences. As also taking of small test bits, you can see Prachi here, Shutonuka here, which will provide us with building an idea of the chronology at different scales across the landscape. Use of ground penetrating radar for prehistory, where we are able now to build up the stratigraphic sequence of various sediments across sites without the need for excavation, and then correlate it with various excavated features or with other sections which are exposed, and thereby be able to build up a subsurface geomorphology or paleo landscape, if you like to call it that way. And we have also published several articles looking at the use of predictive site locational modeling, combining both satellite remote sensing, GIS environments, and fieldwork to be able to actually pinpoint which areas are worth surveying, because as you know, most archaeologists, we don't have time and we don't have funding. So this really helped to demarcate pockets which you can then go and explore in greater detail. After this broad perspective, we narrowed down to several sites which we felt were worth studying. All these little yellow dots on the screen are Paleolithic sites, but all of them are not necessarily the best to excavate because of various issues related to site formation, taphonomy, preservation, etc. So these two sites and another one somewhere here have been chosen for detailed study. And what we believe is that it's not really our goal to jump from site to site and every few years excavate something else, but to have a very systematic long-term strategy, looking at few sites, looking at small pockets, small regions in great detail, so that we can get a better understanding on micro levels of various questions which are of interest to us. And this strategy is really interesting because ever since we started work in 1999, we found that as new disciplines emerge and as new sciences emerge, we can draw on them to address old questions. So the samples collected, the repeated visits, bringing in new colleagues all the time are leading to research which is still going on today at these sites using different methods. Now, again, our methodology has been very innovative, primarily because we were not from a university. We did not have, or a government organization, we did not have a very big student team. So our number of people working with us always was very limited, and we relied a lot on the expertise of the villagers and local stakeholders who worked with us. Therefore, we had to innovate and develop many methods. And in fact, I think we have published a paper on that also, using, say, different things as simple as color coded journals to as complex as here, this use of 3D geometric morphometrics, which Dr. Prachi and Dr. Akhilesh are working on to document sites in 3D and then use the 3D to do other statistical and geospatial studies, or the use of total laser total stations, by which each and every artifact and natural class, you can see here these green and red circles and dots, could be mapped at every level and then again correlated with our 3D maps and be used for some spatial analysis. Of course, collection of samples for a whole range of paleo-environmental geochronological studies and sieving, which has led to fantastic data on questions that can relate to the integrity of sites and what is happening through various fluvial or aeolian or other processes in these locations. So of these sites, both Atharampakam and the new site of Sendra and Palyam are very special sites, often termed by Gamble and others as persistent places. What does this mean? It just means that there is a very, very long history of occupation right from the lower Paleolithic onwards in some cases, with repeated generations of hominins being drawn to these areas for obviously very suitable resources or for whatever reason. And like in this case, at Atarampakam, you have a very thick lower Paleolithic Acheulean horizon. Then you have something which is transitional to an early middle. Then you have the middle in again a different set of sediments representative of different environmental conditions. And then for some reason, the site is abandoned and just deserted and occupied again much later in time, for which we don't really have any deposit. So in the Acheulean levels, and you all know this from the articles which we have written, you have almost continuous sequence by successive hominins leaving behind this large flake, characteristic large flake Acheulean, which is not only dominated by bifaces and other large flake tools, but also a very significant component of these very small flakes that have been shaped into different types of tools, and that in some cases are even conjoinable, which indicates some degree of integrity for the site. And then right at the bottom of these fluvio-lacustrine deposits, you have a small gravel bed somewhere here at the base, which was a small episode in which a stream cut through the site, deposited some of these cobbles and pebbles that you see here, and again Acheulean hominins were occupying this area. Whereas in these deposits, right and top, it's very fine-grained silts and clays, and you don't have any large cobbles or pebbles for which they could use to make tools. Now, when actually the interesting story is that when we began excavations here, this entire deposit had been classified to be really old, that is pre-Pleistocene, some Cretaceous shales. And everyone said that it's practically impossible to have obviously Paleolithic stone tools in very, very old sediments. But we went by the guidance of our local village team, who said that if you're looking for tools like this, you better dig deep here. And they stake their salary on this, and we, when we excavated, we followed their advice, because the advice of the local inhabitants of a region is always very, very good, better than that of archaeologists. And we found these hundreds of Acheulean tools in a deposit which for 100 years had been thought to be Cretaceous. So how did we prove it when no one believed for several years? We dated it, and the dates definitely fall between something like 1.07 to around 1.7, 1.8 million years through this paleomagnetic and cosmogenic nuclide burial dating. So the implications for that are not only in terms of the migration of hominins from Africa to India or not, that is a debate by itself, and just we cannot really say the way that things move the other way around. But anyway, if we assume that hominins migrated from Africa to India, they did so much earlier than was considered. But it's also important to look at the fact that this site is not in isolation. Sites in Maharashtra, sites elsewhere in Karnataka have also given very early age estimates, and together gives us a very clear picture that the Acheulean in India was certainly as old as what is happening in parts of Africa and West Asia. And we can now start building up a picture of how these hominins adapted as they moved across even the Indian landscape, adapting to different raw materials, different ecological conditions, and different geographic settings. So this was a very interesting result of our studies, and I'm sure more sites will come up and with which have equally old dates. Obviously, the lithics form a very important part, and as I said, not only do you have the typical Acheulean large flake component, but also these small tools which have been shaped into many different types, and the ways in which populations are exploiting raw material becomes a study by itself. So if you have Atharampakam somewhere here in this red area and you have all the green dots as sites, we mapped all the raw material sources across this entire region based on geology maps. And now with the help of XRF and XRD coming up and Raman, we are narrowing and pinpointing the location of the sources from where different populations extracted their raw material. So if you have a conglomerate bed like this, it becomes really difficult because of the diversity of the nature of composition of quartzites or quartzitic sandstones within them. But nevertheless, the preliminary studies which are coming out from this research are giving us certain clues as to what is the relationship between different sites and the raw material sources, and also within the type within sites what are the differences in the preferences for different tool artifact types, and also issues related to patination and encrustations found on the surface of these tools. At Athirampakam, the site is really important because you don't have any of the large boulders in the lower Paleolithic Acheulean levels. So obviously they are going somewhere off-site, somewhere in the landscape, perhaps Senra and Palyam, and they are detaching these large flakes from boulder cores using many different methods which we are studying. And then these large flakes are brought to the site either partly finished or completely shaped into hand axes, and many of these hand axes and cleavers and other tools were finished on site, resulting in a whole lot of waste products being generated, these waste debitage flakes. And because the site has no raw material, people needed to conserve this, and so they took these waste products and retouched them into small flake tools which were then discarded there. We don't have many hammer stones. In fact, I think we have only a broken part of one, which suggests that people were probably curating, carrying away hammer stones, carrying away some of the tools to use elsewhere in the landscape. So we have written some papers debating group size, debating ways of in which the site was occupied, and some of papers on the lithics more are coming up now. And this gives us a very interesting perspective of what people were doing at this one spot in the landscape, at this one period in time. It's not that the same methods were carried on later. As the site was occupied in later time periods, this changes. So, in deconstructing stone tool technology from either Athirampakam or from Senra and Palyam, we are not only using traditional analysis of the lithics, but also looking at many different aspects which you can gain from the study of a lithic assemblage, right down to this work from Senra and Palyam on 3D geometric, 3D geometric morphometrics, and trying to build patterning from that and compare it also with experimental studies on lithic technology. So this leads to the point that to understand any lithic assemblage, whatever time period, without experimentation, without actually making the tools yourself and experimenting with replicating, as you see here, to the left bottom left hand side of the screen, these are replicating hand axes from Athirampakam. So you can see they're not perfect, but each flake card that has been detached has been done with an intention of trying to understand what hominins were thinking or what their decision making was in flaking at the site of Athirampakam, and this is giving us some very good results. This is combined with an experimental tool use project run by Dr. Akhilesh, in which flakes are being used on different materials to be able to build a database of what happens when the particular specific rocks that are used at the sites which we are studying um, can give the signatures which are seen on these particular rock types, not any old quartzite or quartzitic sandstone, but narrowing down roughly to what we are getting from the excavation. So this study is very interesting, and it's been going on with a number of volunteers, interns, and with our own team as well. So this is something that we can then prepare casts and then study under the microscope and hope that we get some interesting results. Now, as I said, this site only gives you a glimpse into one aspect of what was happening in this vast landscape. So to address other questions of hominin behavior on a regional scale, we excavated this site of Senra and Palyam, which is nearby. And if you see, it's very close to Athirampakam. It's not far at all, but it's completely different in many ways. Firstly, at Athirampakam, you have the Ashulian and you have an early middle. At Senra and Palyam, you have an Ashulian and you have some core and flake assemblages of the lower Paleolithic. And as you can see, the context is completely different. The sediments are different. The geomorphological processes operating here are different. The stratigraphy is different. So it represents another geographic, another environmental geomorphological context in which your hominins were occupying, probably overlapping over a long time period. So this is a general view of the site. You can see a gravel bed, a colluvial gravel, in which you have number of tools, literally, extremely high density of typical Acheulean artifacts and bifaces. And here at this site, we have the complete reduction sequence, beginning with the large cores, various stages of manufacture. We have the debitage. We have, very important, a number of conjoinable pieces. So they are refitting, which tells you about the integrity of the site. And these studies are currently being undertaken by Dr. Akhilesh and Dr. Prachi. So they've almost finished the analysis. And as far as the bifaces are concerned, Dr. Prachi is doing a study of 3D geometric morphometrics, which is giving us some very interesting results when we are looking at this in relation to hand axes generated by novices or other sites. Then we have a core and flake based lower Paleolithic, where again you see that we have a very interesting, very high percentage of conjoinable artifacts. So you can actually fit the core and flake together, and there are many of this kind. And here you see a pocket where you have cores and you have flakes lying all around them in much lower density than compared to that uh, lying above in the Acheulean. So at present, we do not know what the dates for the site are, but we are trying cosmogenic beryllium, we are trying luminescence, we have tried paleomagnetic, and we are expecting the dates to come very soon. And then we'll be able to see how this site fits into the general picture of core and flake and Acheulean assemblages from across the world. So there are many things that we do not know in Indian prehistory and Indian Paleolithic studies. And this site and Athirampakam and work done by other scholars all across India are putting together a bigger picture of this very, very interesting time span. Now, as you all know, there's been a lot of talk recently on modern humans, on the Middle Paleolithic, and on Acheulean endings. Now, from Athirampakam itself, what we do see is that post Acheulean, you have a break. Then you have a different environment where you get around 385 plus minus 64, a gradual change. What do I mean by gradual? You still have some of the large bifaces continuing, but mostly they are becoming smaller. You have some tools with appearance of a tang. You have different core technologies appearing. And then by around 210, 280, 260,000, these stop and you have a typical middle Paleolithic which continues right to 172,000, and then the site is abandoned for some reason. And at the same time, you also get some quartz crystals which has been brought to the site of around this time period by some hominins and has some non-functional purpose. So this story tells you very interestingly that similar changes and transitions were going on in India as to what was happening in parts of East Africa or elsewhere in Eurasia. This is not sudden. It can go back to 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. We do not know, as far as India is concerned, what species is can be associated with this, although they have better data from Africa and elsewhere. And what we do see is that there is no sharp break. It's not that the Middle Paleolithic appears suddenly. there is a gradual change which is occurring at this site, and now more data from Andhra is coming out. So, which also shows that this is happening across parts of the Southeast Indian coast or Southeast India in some areas and perhaps elsewhere as well. And therefore, the story of the Middle Paleolithic origins, the story of perhaps modern human or some other species dispersals into India is much more complex than we can imagine. So, whether it is hypothesis 1 with microlithic technology at 60, whether it's hypothesis 2 around and post 125 with the middle paleolithic, we really are not sure of what is happening in the areas where we are working, and we can say that there is evidence of both dispersals into India, and there is evidence of some local innovation and invention which is going on as well. So the scenario is much more complex than what we assumed earlier. Again, in our own area, when you talk about the microlithization or the process of or the microlithic sites which are distributed, we see very few in the north. As we go further south towards Kanyakumari, definitely the proportion of sites, the density of tools increases greatly. And one of the important areas where they are found is with these enigmatic red sand dunes or the theories. Many people have worked on this topic for over 100 years, and yet when we went back to revisit it, many of these sections have been dated both in India and in Sri Lanka. But we do see that there is some dichotomy, some contradictions in the context at which these tools are occurring, whether on the dune in some cases, whether within beds within the dunes in other cases. And these are problems which still need to be tackled, which is one of our ongoing projects. Lastly, in collaboration with the Department of Archaeology, State Government of Tamil Nadu, we examined some of the sites where you have these characteristic polished stone axes, polished stone stilts, which were thought to represent a period called, which you term commonly the Neolithic, and a transition from hunting gathering to agro-pastoralism, shift in ways of life, settlements, etc. So what did we find? In this article which we published, we definitely found that there are sites which are really interesting where the manufacturing process of these cells occur, right from sourcing of the basalts or dolerites within these formations over here to various stages of manufacture of the axis, and then their transport somewhere else for grinding, and then their final context within or near the settlements. So this has, however, led to questions as to how one characterizes this time period at all, as to trying to avoid the use of tool types as markers of any particular cultural phase, and recognition that certain tool types are time transgressive and must be understood in their own context. So this whole question is something which is really interesting from a technological point of view as well as from the broader socio-economic framework. Many of our colleagues have been involved in studies of phytoliths, soil geochemistry. Now, recently, some more isotope studies are going on in taphonomy to build up an understanding of the paleo environments in this small pocket region around Athirampakam and Sendra and Palyam. All these papers are published, and you can have a look at it and get a glimpse as to changing environments, changing local vegetation to which our hominins were obviously adapting their strategies of making stone tools or site location too. Now, that's all as far as the research is concerned. But in this particular talk, I would like to pay some more attention to outreach for sustainable conservation. As you all know, this is the situation which is happening in India right now. Even within a day, as I'm speaking, sites are being dug up. And the reason is a lack of awareness. So you have rapid urbanization now. If it's a sculpture or a monument or something large or coins, people know what that means. But we may not, most people do not know what stone tools are. And therefore, unknowingly, this site, for example, has been completely destroyed. Also, many of our legislations do not tackle impact assessment in as aggressive a way as they should. for pre-construction impact assessment, rapid salvage and conservation of smaller areas. If it's a very large dam or very large project, yes, that is definitely there. But this is something which is going on for these very small, fragile sites where even footfall by tourism can destroy the site. Okay. So we worked with ISRO, and in a joint project with colleagues there, we prepared all these maps of mapping land use occurring at each and every site. So we quantified it, and then we worked to prepare proposals as to what can be done for each individual site. You can't have the same strategy for all sites, but for each site, what is the best way we can manage to either fully conserve it, to allow infrastructure development with salvage, or to nothing can be done, and to use it as an example for teaching or something like that. So this is also published, you can have a look at it. But the key is actually outreach. The key is reaching people, right from children to local stakeholders, which can create a long term impact. And this has been our strategy right from when we started work in 1999 onwards. So children, as I said earlier, local villagers, stakeholders, university students, and the general public, and to use multiple approaches for each audience. It can't be one approach for everybody. So what we started doing, we actually began publishing about it much later, because someone told us that you should actually start publishing your pedagogical method. So we have done that. We started in 2015, started publishing, and then we have written about what our philosophy of teaching is for schools, or for the general public, or specifically for teaching lithic napping, or for heritage management. And now a new paper is coming out on teaching novice nappers and implications for the Paleolithic. Okay. So what we believe that in our methods, as far as the classroom is concerned, as far as the theoretical part is concerned, obviously you are communicating facts as they are presented in published papers or books, but also reading between the lines, stimulating critical thinking and alternate interpretations in discussions. And a very key aspect is building of networks across themes. I'm not talking about networks here in terms of people necessarily, but across themes and disciplinary boundaries. The reason for this is we tend to look at our discipline in little boxes, archaeology departments or history departments, with little consideration for the fact that archaeology is one discipline that encompasses everything. As we all know that you're all archaeologists in the audience, or you are students of history and in heritage, and you realize this. So this is one thing which we felt was very important. And in teaching, to have an experiential approach, alternate ways of experiencing the topic depending on whom you are teaching, enable emotional self-assessment, navigating emotions while doing certain activities and learning, because everybody does not learn the same way, and encouraging cooperation, challenging paradigms in competitive grading, and enabling self-made goals. So this is something which I use sometimes, and if possible, it's very difficult to do this in a formal environment, but it's something we should think about in destroying this competitive approach among students, and to think more about how people can work in cooperation and then work towards their own self-made goals. So, for example, one example we also do in collaboration with other projects, for example, with the Paleo Home project run by Dr. Prachi and Akhilesh. And here also to use these learning methods to build bridges across disciplines from various, whether it's students or whether it is senior scientists, whether it is in the room in hybrid meetings, or whether it is actually doing things in the field. This is something that we are trying to implement, whether it is at a formal learning environment in a class, or whether it is on a natural learning environment which can go on in the field, or while you're talking, or doing something else. So when we are looking at pedagogy for adults, I mean students and faculty who come to us, uh, The selection of participants in small workshops is something which we pay a lot of attention to be able to um, provide the maximum benefit to people who uh, are, are interested or are willing to undergo the methods that we are putting them through, and to devise an appropriate course structure which can change depending on the nature of the participants selected. So this is also published in lithic in and what is important in any pedagogical structured course to run through several levels, which are sometimes, I put this in the form of a step, but it's not necessarily one following the other. It is sometimes an immersive experience which has variability, looks at learning curves of individuals, looks at individual innovation and cooperative mapping and learning. So this is if a course is, for example, structured on lithic technology. In the introductory sessions, we often obviously deal with theory and observation of the artifacts or whatever we are teaching, and combine that with a rapid quiz or a game, and an educational game which is devised and which may differ from group to group to enable them to grasp any specific concept that we wish to communicate to them, followed by discussion. In our early experiential learning, that is actually teaching students napping, this is not a random workshop or something like that in which one person simply demonstrates and the students follow. In fact, many of the participants do not know or do not realize the amount of thinking that goes behind structuring a simple napping event such as knocking codes of flakes. Here we design that to enable participants and to enable students either consciously or subconsciously to get an awareness of decision making, say for choice of raw materials. Then there are number of approaches which are used by the expert. It can be a demonstration, it can be observation imitation, it can be guided aid which is verbal or non-verbal through demonstrations, to teach the participants, and I'll discuss that a little bit further. And it also involves a great deal of structured placement of the participants to encourage interactivity, discussion on achievement of goals, problems, and clarifications, all which are supported by worksheets and by video recording by us and by our own notes, which we make in many cases. And this leads to the study of tools, whether functionality or not in terms of different activities, and an examination which is actually a test of what they have all learned, but in the form of a game, where we again make assessments on the learning curves of individual participants, and then of course discussion and feedback. This has to be set in an ethical framework. So you have a number of declarations which need to be signed and act as multipliers, so that people who have participated or attended in our workshop can go and do the same thing. We are quite happy that people will follow our methods and copy them, so that we can act as a major center for multipliers, that you go back, you learn what we have taught you, you use the same methods of teaching, and you go back and teach others. And we are very happy that this is actually happening in India today, and many events of this nature going around. So this is one approach, but it is not, as I said, static. As we move forward, so this is, for example, the theory, observation, handling, and discussion, and interactive teamwork to have a problem solving game. Obviously, this explores ancient cognition as well, from modern to ancient, and we factor in safety, we factor in ethics and consent. So, one of the important aspects of this is the organization spatially of how people are sitting and how people are made to interact. So, whether it is in a circular format, whether it is in other formats which are more unstructured, this has a great deal of meaning, and this article is currently coming out, so you can read it, in which we also look at and encourage the interdisciplinary, the inter participant the degree of communication and the ways in which a group learns together rather than individuals learning. It is also very important to think of how the individual behaves in a group and how this influences to a better in a very productive way the learning curves and the learning skills. So these decision making skills, whether it is something which they do on their own or whether it's something which we tell them to think about doing, has a very key role to play in the entire process of completing a particular task or moving to another level of understanding of the subject. Also, cooperative problem solving. So, for example, in mapping this large course, some can't do on your own very easily, and this teamwork which they come forward naturally without being told, or which develops organically in a group, is something that we have seen and we have written about this, and which definitely aids the process of learning. So through time, I won't go through this in detail, but through time, right from this, and I'll just go back a bit, right from this structure which I've shown in three levels here, we are not static and we constantly upgrade and enhance our methods of teaching. So this is just published, this will come out this year now, by next month hopefully, and here we are looking at ways in which we can maximize the learning experiences of novice nappers, people who are new to napping, and we have factored in what is the influence of different teaching methods on outcomes, and this can be quantified and looked at qualitatively as well. So whether it is just simple mimicry, or whether it is guided intervention, or whether it is reverse engineering, or whether it is verbal, non-verbal, whatever the case may be, so you have different ways in which people learn. Whatever the case may be, you can look at it qualitatively with an observation list, or you can quantify it like Akhilesh and Prachi are doing here, in which you get some very concrete data on how learning outcomes differ depending on the method you are using, or whether the method, whatever methods you use, have meaning or have no meaning, and how you can improve that further. So this is what we are also working with. So you can then move on to examining learning outcomes in many different ways. So one way is actually studying the material produced by the novice snappers and quantifying that and seeing the learning curves. And the other, you can also look at how they are putting together all the knowledge which they have accumulated in the course of the workshop to perform specific tasks, and then to look at the success rates or what they experience during the outcome of these particular tasks. In contrast, when you are dealing with children, our pedagogical strategies are completely different and are based on creating alternate ways of learning, connecting children with scientists and archaeologists, and communicating the same now, right now, through a book which we have published and through many different online methods as well. So just you can go to our website, and these are some of the simple films which are made by interns, undergraduate interns working with us, which implies that the intern who has come to work not only understands the topic, for example napping large flakes or prehistoric stone tools, but is able to use that knowledge to communicate to others in a very simple yet factual manner. So if we are, this is one of the books which we have just brought out, and I'll quickly go through this. So in this book, for example, I'll just switch off the volume. In this book, for example, these are activity books which are meant to accompany our workshops, so that at every point children can relate what they are doing with what is there in the book, and then build up a more deeper understanding of any module. This one, for example, is only prehistory, but there are many others, uh, to be able to uh, leave the workshop with a better understanding of the subject. So, lastly, why do we do all this? Just a reminder that this is one of the key problems that we are facing. And unless we step up our research, step up our public outreach, pedagogy, science communication, most of our prehistoric heritage will remain in museums or will remain in books and articles, and we will lose all our sites. So, this is just a call for conservation. So thank you. I want to thank all the fellowships, funding agencies, ASI, Department of Archaeology, Government of Tamil Nadu, the villagers of all the places which we have worked with our families, students, volunteers who have come from all over, our staff and the funding agencies. And again, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to speak, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. It was
Yeah.
such a insightful lecture. Uh, so now I invite from viewers if they have any question. I think so. Two questions already submitted in the chat box. Out of that, Oishi is asking that, ma'am, the meager appearance of the hammerstone, can it be interpreted as a uses as a core at a later stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. The issue is at Athirampakam, Acheulean levels, we have hardly any codes, very few. So it's a site, it's a level where people are coming in with for a specific aim. They're bringing in partly to completely finished tools, primarily bifaces and other large flake tools, and they are curating. We know that they were using hammerstones of some type because we see the evidence in the habitage. We know that these were stone because we see the evidence in the lithics. They're not antler or something else, maybe not. And we know that we are not getting it in any of the trenches. So obviously the logical conclusion is that they're carrying it away. Whether they used it as core somewhere else, possible, very possible, but not at the site. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Another question is from Siripuram. He is
Appearance of
asking what?
my
Yeah.
not okay, I can see it. Now we don't know. The dates from the sites in Narmada are not there as yet, I think, to the of this early Pleistocene date. So definitely they are not coming via Narmada. Or if they we don't have that evidence there. We don't know what route they're taking. We don't even know whether they are coming from Africa at all. Maybe it's the other way around. We don't know. So we have too few sites. We have Isampur, we have many sites in Maharashtra which are early Pleistocene. It is very possible that there are many, many more sites, but the exact route which they took in India is impossible to say right now. How were the tools made from the site of Athirampakam? So how are the tools made? They are made on large flakes. The bifaces are made from large flakes, and there are other tools which were made from some smaller cores, and then you have a lot of small tools which were made on the waste flakes coming from the making larger tools. And migration pattern is something which is really difficult to say. We know, okay, maybe they came from Africa to India in the early Pleistocene around 1.7 million, but the specific route, I wouldn't like to speculate. Okay, thank you, Aruniji.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Mm.
Any other questions from any viewer? Any curiosity regarding the lecture? Because lecture was so interesting. It covered the facet from research to particularly outreach. Actually, ma'am, about this megalithic, the same thing is happening. As you
Yeah.
know, the Nagpur, there are the particularly various sites are there. Out of that, might we also that we learned that site is Raipur Hingna.
Yes,
Now, if
yes.
you go to the site, you will not find a site.
Amnalinga is
There
also one.
Yeah, so there were beautiful this megalithic, these tombs were there. There's particularly these burials were there, and because of this land mafias, or you can say the
Yeah.
process of this urbanization, completely everything is being gone.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
this is
That's
happening. This is happening unfortunately because of this urbanization also, this land expansion. Even though many of the sites that during the process of this cultivation,
yes.
particularly this soil this removal, that those sites already have been gone. Like the one site which I excavated, the site name was Khopadi, because of that during the cultivation they got a lot of skulls.
Yeah.
So skulls meaning a Khopadi. So on the
Yeah.
basis of that, the name was there.
This is a problem all over the country in all sites of all time periods. But especially the more fragile, like megaliths, Paleolithic sites, it's really a big issue.
Yes. So any
Thank
other
you.
questions again? Okay,
Once we
I think
report
so.
the site, but by the time we get permission, it's gone. Yeah, I
Yes,
guess that's true.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. Build have
Okay, and
advantage. How about protection and preservation of prehistoric sites in India? Yes, Aruniji, this is a big question, a big problem. We need, I think, very strict legislations for impact assessment prior to any form of construction, whether it's a small building, whether it's a factory, whether it's a farm. We need that. Otherwise, it's very difficult.
Oishi, do you have any other question? Oishi?
Yes. Can I
Yeah.
just speak? It's too much typing. So, ma'am, I have a question. Ma'am, the first, it's a fantastic lecture. So, ma'am, hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Yes. Yes, Oishi.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Ma'am, what I'm saying is that, ma'am, when we introduce school children, like the way you introduce school children to prehistory, uh, ma'am, are they able to identify on the basis of shape or on the basis of usage of the artifact?
Meaning, I didn't get.
Ma'am, if we look at the cognition of the school children, I'm not talking about us who have been trained in
Yeah.
archaeology. Ma'am, are they able to identify the tools based on shape or on the base of usage?
See, we are not trying to ask them to identify. We tell them this is a core, this is a flake, then some basic types, hand axe, cleaver, etc. What we are trying to get across is the broad picture of prehistory. So, what are the questions we want to ask? The story of evolution, how tools were made, how were they used? Little bit about rock art, little bit about survey, maybe little bit about excavations, and little bit about obviously fossils, animal fossils. So we are not asking them, okay, identify a tool, identify that it's not natural. That's it. So that it's for very young children, that itself is good enough. But when we coming to PhD students, of course, that's a totally different ball game, and there we discuss the issues in nomenclature. Some That's totally different way of looking at things. So, for different audiences, the amount of information which you want to provide should be different. It's not the same. Over to you, Akhilesh.
To answer, to answer OSC's question, sometimes they come up with the, like hand access and cleaver, or they identify this as a sharp edge. If that they have, they sometimes say that this is a tool because it has a sharp edge. Then we take them more into the detail of the artifacts. Just mere sharp edge doesn't mean that it's a tool or something. Then we go
Okay.
get into the anatomy of the flake and all that. So sometimes, yes, do they come up with some kids, they come up with shape as well. They try to identify with the shape as well, particularly hand axes, cleavers, and any sharp cutting edge if they have. So
Okay. So
yes,
no, because I had this question because it's not kids actually, but then there are people who like I do not understand how to make them understand that it is a modified tool, like it's a modified flake, like anything with a sharp edge cannot just be a tool, because this public outreach has gone to such a level that like there are bloggers and there are any amount of people who are going to places and they're picking, oh, these are prehistoric tools, and they're just showing natural rocks. So I was thinking, like, is there any way we can just tell them that there is a sort of modification
yes,
first
Yes.
rather
you
than
can
just picking up something and saying?
For
you,
that, we
you
made
can
this
do that.
film.
Oh, sorry, you
Yes.
can do that. So, see, just snap in front of them and make couple of flakes and make couple of tool if you like. Do the retouch, and then they understand the whole game.
So
So
this is a major point you have raised on amateurs who are engaged in archaeology out of interest. Now, on the positive side, that's really good. The more people who are interested, the better it is, and the more people who are going out to find sites, the better it is. On the negative side, exactly what you have said, wrong identification, a collection of artifacts from sites which lead to the
Yeah.
destruction of the site. All these things we bring into our public outreach workshops when we end by saying, do not pick up things. We always end with a conservation message. So you must not pick up. This is, if you find a site, this is what you should do. This is what you should not do. Okay, that is there in our video also, which is made by our interns on our YouTube channel. So you can see that this is a sort of message which is very necessary to communicate. So it's really a big point, not only in India, elsewhere in the world also. This thing which is going on between the amateurs, interested, and the professionals.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Akhilesh Bhaiya. Thank you. Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
so much.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Now I think so. The time is up.
Yes.
I request my colleague, Dr. Amit Ranjan, to say just a vote of thanks to the dignitaries who are present today for delivering a lecture.
नमस्कार मैडम, धन्यवाद। इतना अच्छा लेक्चर आज हुआ है, कई दिनों बाद मैडम को सुनने का मौका मिला, अखिलेश सर को सुनने का मौका मिला, हमारे पूरे ऑडियंस को। मैं कला संस्कृति युवा विभाग के बिहार विरासत विकास समिति की तरफ से आप सभी को धन्यवाद देता हूँ, स्पेशली मैडम को कि इतने शॉर्ट नोटिस पे वो आके हम लोगों को इतना बढ़िया लेक्चर दिया है। और कुमार अखिलेश सर को भी मैं थैंक यू करता हूँ, बहुत समय बाद सर को देख पा रहा हूँ मैं। सर आप दोनों लोग जब भी मौका मिले तो प्लीज बिहार आइए, बिहार की आर्कियोलॉजी को भी थोड़ा नया शेप देने की जरूरत है और इसके लिए हम लोग फिर से थोड़ा और प्रयास करेंगे। आप सभी लिसनर्स को भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। इसी तरह जुड़ते रहिए और इस तरह के लेक्चर्स में आते रहिए। थैंक यू वंस अगेन मैडम। थैंक यू आपको भी सर।
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for inviting us. Thank you, Kanti. Also, we enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice to meet.
Bye.
Bye bye. Have a
Bye
nice
bye.
day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
BHDS, thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.